Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can always read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now on Washington and Jaden Daniels, why they targeted him so hard and why they really liked him. So there's a lot of things are kind of self-explanatory, but there's, clearly they've liked him for a long time, much longer than I think people realize. And we could all guess, but nobody knew how long they really liked him until now. So anyways, in a minute, I'll be joined by former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen as we discuss Washington's draft class, some philosophical things. We talk obviously about a little bit about Jaden Daniels, and we also talk about the offensive line and some of the other picks that Logan really likes. And can Brandon Coleman play left tackle? I wanted to get someone whose opinion I really value, and I know he talks to offensive line coaches. So do I. And I think I told you after the draft, I talked to one who felt like he could do it, that athletically he could do it. He could play tackle or guard. Sometimes when you talk about guard versus tackle, you're talking about length of arms. So his arm length is not an issue. So Logan and I go into all that. He, much better than I, talk about what the possibilities are there with him. So stay tuned for that. And I know we hear other names thrown out about like, could they sign this guy or this guy? The thing I always say is chasing names is never the answer. I think chasing talent is. So just getting a guy whose name does not mean he's still what he used to be. Donovan Smith now has played for, Tampa Bay no longer wanted him. He committed a lot of penalties there, was not playing pretty well at the end. The Chiefs committed penalties there too. And that was a problem there. And they're not keeping him around for a reason. So is he really the answer here? I don't know that I would say that. Would it be better to have Cornelius Lucas and develop Coleman? And I'm not putting Braden Daniels in there because we didn't see anything last year that suggested he'd be ready this year by any means. And it's a new staff. I don't know what they really think of him to say that, oh, he could be a dark horse in this. There's no way I could say that. I think to me, the options are Lucas and Coleman. And so again, Donovan Smith, you hear, again, people ask us on the live stream, DJ Humphries, well, he tore his ACL on New Year's Eve, not going to be ready. Andres Pete from the Saints played left tackle last year after not having played it for, let me check this. I want to say it was for, how many years was it? It was like 6 or 7 years, something like that, 5 years where he hadn't played it. He was a left tackle in college, but he's been mostly a guard. He had been mostly a guard with the Saints. Did play it last year. Sound like he did all right, but I don't know that people who observe them feel like he's anything more than kind of a replacement level guy. So I don't know that I would look at him as like, oh, he's the solution. And you'll hear what Logan has to say about Cornelius Lucas as to why he feels confident that at least if he has to play for a little bit, that it would be okay. But again, the key will be developing Coleman, and they have to be right on that. I don't know if they are, and we'll see. But anyways, we talk about offensive line, get into all that. Also, before we get to that last thing, for you Gold members, I'm going to be doing a private Zoom session with you on Tuesday night, 7:00 Eastern time. And yeah, Tuesday night. So whatever, May 7th, I think it is. But Tuesday night, 7:00 Eastern time, with a private Zoom for the Gold members. If you want to become a Gold member, go to the Empire Media YouTube page, see the word join, click on that, and check out the membership levels. It will be available to the rest of the members a day or so after that. So there you go. That's it. Let's get to Logan Paulsen. So here's my conversation with former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen. Logan, one of my favorite things to do is always talk about the draft with you. And the nice thing is, I don't know how many conversations we had leading into this draft, but it's nice to talk about what will they do and why should they take this guy or that guy. But hey, this is who they took. And I know you and Craig on the Take Command podcast have already talked about a lot of this stuff. So people want to get more of your thoughts, they can go listen there. But I think in general, I am curious your thoughts on the draft class in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about the draft class. It's funny, because like you go through all this process of like this guy's height, weight, speed, and this is like these amazing catches. But ultimately, like I was really happy to see that they kind of settled on obviously good football players, but guys with tremendous character. and tremendous football character, tremendous personal character, the leadership. When you watch the film, like they play the game the way it's supposed to be played. They're finishing to the whistle. They're pursuing to the football if they're on defense. Offensively, I think when you look at Jaden Daniels, he plays with tremendous physical courage. And I think all those things, it just is a constant theme throughout the draft class. And the reason I like that so much is because when during my time playing, during my time covering the team, you need that personal element to make sure the guy's a good pro. And I feel like they just bet on a bunch of guys that had extremely high floors. And I know that sounds like a negative, but I think at a minimum, these guys are going to be good professional athletes because they've shown an ability to grow professionally. They've shown an ability to compete, and they've shown an ability to lead. And those are the types of guys you want to bet on, guys that are going to motivate themselves to get better. And it's crazy to think that they've got, 7 guys like that from this class, which is pretty cool. So.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, it's probably kind of obvious, but why that's important? Like, what happens? And here's the funny thing: like, there were a couple years ago where there have been other draft classes here where you say, "Oh, they got a bunch of team leaders." I don't know that those team leaders always fit into what the coaches wanted, though.
Sure.
Like, why do you feel like that's important? What are little things that guys like that can add that make a difference for a franchise?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I'm going to take a step back, and it's not even for the franchise. To me, it's just for the player. So, like when you're getting into the NFL from college, it's a projection. You did things at the college level, and I think it's important for fans to understand that the college game is completely different than the NFL game. It's faster, they're bigger, they're smarter, the coverages are more complicated, the offensive schemes are more complicated. And so, how are you as a student? How are you as a learner? How are you as a self-starter? Because guys that I've played with that are self-starters, even if they're late round draft picks, I think a great example of two guys is, or a couple guys is Reed Dowdy, Lorenzo Alexander, Will Compton, Kedrick Golston, guys that kind of were unheralded draft picks in terms of coming to the Commanders. But because they were self-motivated, because they were guys that wanted to improve every single day, they got better and they were able to maximize their talent. And really, as a talent evaluator, like that's what you're looking for. You want guys that are going to contribute to your organization. You don't want guys that are, high upside plays necessarily that never pan out. You want guys that are going to pan out. You want guys that are going to hit. And so when you emphasize those traits, that's what you're getting. Now, in the context of the organization, if you have a bunch of guys like that, that becomes the standard, that becomes the cultural expectation for your organization. And it doesn't happen with coaches, it happens with the guys you bring in. And when you bring in a bunch of free agents that are wired that way, and then on top of that, you bring in a bunch of of draft picks that are wired that way, all of a sudden now you have 25, 30 guys that kind of embody this culture that can bring along people who maybe aren't wired that way. And then you get a culture of self-starters, motivators, teachers, and all of a sudden this cultural element which people are talking about becomes a player-led thing, which ultimately as a coach is what you're looking for.
Did you see more of a plan and maybe a clearer sign of their approach, not just through the draft, but you brought up free agency, but from free agency and the draft? Did you see more of a plan with this group?
Yeah, I think that's the one thing, one amongst many things that's very exciting about this new staff, specifically Adam Peters and Dan Quinn working together, is the vision was extremely clear. We're going to bring in a certain type of guy, a certain type of player. We're going to bring in a certain type of leader. I think Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz, Austin Eckler, those guys speak to that. And then we're going to keep that vision throughout the draft. We're going to keep that high character, high compete perspective throughout. And people say, well, all these guys are competitive. I'm telling you, these guys are in kind of like if you had like like a little bar graph of, height, weight, speed, college production, college competitiveness, their leadership across the board is extremely high. And so you bring those guys in, and again, we talked about cultural and organizational identity. That's how you do it, man. You get these guys that come in, they're wired the right way. And now as a coach, your job is easy because I don't have to prod you every single day to become better. You will become better. And because there's so many guys now around the organization, they're going to encourage the kind of the holdovers from the last regime to do that same thing. So I think it's great that continuity of vision was so acute here and so specific. And I just think it's great because I think that's how you build, like you lay the foundation. Like when I was in San Francisco in 2017, like Adam Peters was a part of that organization, and that's what they did. They brought in a bunch of high character free agents and a high character draft picks, and a lot of guys that were going to hit. So I think that that's just an important kind of foundational piece for this organization.
And obviously, when you bring up like guys like Reed Dowdy and all that, you'd have to include yourself in there as an undrafted guy who lasted a long time in the NFL. That's how
Right.
you do it. But, you know, and it's funny because I even go back to like Brian Mitchell. I remember when Brian Mitchell got here and I wasn't covering the team yet, but I remember talking to him later and he's like, listen, you know, some people get drafted, they think they've made it. He goes, I think I just got here. You had to
Right.
go earn it. And when you have like, even with Jaden Daniels talking about, I have to go earn it. Now, he knows he's going to be the face of a franchise at some point, but you kind of want to hear guys say, I've got to earn this. And you know, I think we've seen what happens here in the past when guys are given it.
Oh, I mean, I totally agree. Like we got to do an interview on the Command Center YouTube page with Jaden, and that was the thing. It gave me like goosebumps when he was like, "Man, I got to work. I got to work to get better. I got to work to understand the game." And you know, he's been coached. He knows what to say, but that's part of his personality, and that shows up not only in his words, but that also shows up in his actions over his last 5 or 6 years of college football. Like he's gotten better at every single aspect and he's improved as the level of competition's improved, not because he's this tremendous athlete, which he is, but because he's put that work in. And I think like I tell this to people all the time. Like I've never met a dumb NFL veteran who's been in the league for like 10 years because they might be dumb in terms of how to do their taxes or not totally literate in that area, but they know football, they know what it means to be a pro, they know how to take care of their industry and their body, and that's what you're looking for with these guys. You want guys that have a long runway. They're going to be staples of your organization for a long time. Like the worst thing is to draft a guy with a high upside that's not a self-starter that can't get himself there. So I think like I get goosebumps just thinking about that interview because like that's what you want to hear from your franchise quarterback. A guy with all the talent in the world, the first thing he says to you is like, "Man, I got to work, I got to earn it." And I think that's a pretty cool thing.
You know what he was doing on the plane ride home Friday last week?
No, was it cool though? What we got?
He he was for an hour, he's standing up in the plane going through the checks and other calls from the playbook.
I mean, that's what you want, man, because you can't play the position if you don't know what's going on. And I think like I used to do this leadership thing when I was in Atlanta with Dan, and he'd have me talk to the rookies and the undrafted free agents. And one of the things, like, you know, how many of your friends and people from back home were like, "Man, I'd die to be in the NFL. I'd kill to be in the NFL," which are crazy things to say, you know. But all you guys have to do is just know the playbook. Just put in
Right.
a couple hours a day knowing the playbook. And here's a guy in Jaden Daniels who's just gotten it and is already working on understanding that. And you know, and to me, it's not everyone's like, oh, he's doing that for show, but that's what he did at LSU, getting up at 5
Right.
a.m., bringing guys with him. Like that's the type of character you're bringing in. Now, is he going to be a great pro because of that? No, but is he putting himself in a better position to be a great pro? Absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny because I talked to somebody about the 5 a.m. workouts with the receivers. And this is a person who is like, obviously, you know, pretty high up or whatever. And he's just like, no bleeping way would I have shown up if I was a receiver at 5 a.m. Like
Yeah.
that's what I think impressed them was not just that he organized it, but they showed up, which then speaks to what they felt was something with him as well.
Right.
And, you know, and not to like overdo it, but I think that stuff all matters that he got guys to follow him in that regard.
Yeah, and again, like we're not saying that he's going to be the greatest quarterback of
Right.
all
Oh,
time
no.
because receivers get up at 5 a.m. But I want my quarterback to have that ability to engage with his teammates. To get like I
Right.
remember asking him, I was like, "How did you get him up?" Like I know a lot of receivers I know wouldn't have gotten up. He's like, "It was hard, man. It was a process." So think about it. He was doing it himself. He slowly brought people along, and eventually that became the standard for offensive football at LSU. And
Mhm.
I think like a guy that has that wherewithal, that has that ability, that has that focus and ability to connect to his teammates is what you want at the position. Everyone talks about leadership, always quiet. That's a leader right there. Yeah, I don't care how quiet you are. Like you're leading men at that point. And again, I'm not saying he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, but at least those pieces are there that make you say, wow, this guy could be pretty special in terms of leading this offense, leading this organization, and getting this thing back on the right track in conjunction with, you know, improved personnel and improved coaching and improved front office work. So I think it's kind of a whole pie coming together. But those types of stories, which I've heard from multiple people, get me very excited.
Right. And this guarantees nothing because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, there's health issue, for every
Yeah.
player in the NFL, there's health concerns, there's this and that. So you don't know that, it doesn't guarantee anything, but it is why they liked him so much before the draft. And it turns out liked him even way more, I think, than people were certain about.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think it all speaks to that. And it's partly what separated him from everybody else for them.
Yeah, and I think so. It's multifactorial, obviously, because JJ's got the tremendous leadership. Everyone talks about Drake May's competitiveness, but I think it's also packaged with what you saw on the field, especially his last year at LSU. I mean, one of the things about offensive football in the NFL is especially coming from a Kyle Shanahan background. I'm talking about Adam Peters now,
Mm.
being in that offense. One of the things Kyle's always preaching is how do we find explosive plays? How do we manufacture them? And here with Jaden Daniels, you've got a guy who can throw you explosive plays. He can find explosive plays with his legs, and that's a deadly combination, I think. And so if you can find 5 explosive plays in the NFL, you win. Like I think a great example of that is the Cincinnati Bengals before they drafted Jamar Chase. They were almost dead last in explosive plays. They
Mhm.
draft Jamar Chase. They increased their explosive play total by about 30 over the course of the season, and they're in the top 5, and they're one of the best offenses in football. It just shows you the value of being able to manufacture that. And here you've got a guy who's an explosive to stick of dynamite, throwing the football, best deep ball thrower in the draft this last year, and ability to kill you with his legs. Not against like some podunk defenses, against SEC defenses, which is pretty exciting. So
Right. And that's what I think also led them to him too. Now, everybody's going to scream, but can they protect him?
right,
And
right,
the funny thing is, like, and we have talked about this, it's not as simple as, oh, just draft 5 new offensive linemen. There are ways to help a kid that I did not feel like they did last year, from play calling to, play calling, a lot of it. And then, game planning, and then
manage game
decision
management.
making,
Yeah,
decisions, game, how you, like you said, manage the game, but also for the quarterback, being able to get rid of the ball in time, et cetera. There's a lot of ways to offset some of that. You just have to do it. And that's sometimes, not as easy as it sounds. So have they done enough there? And first of all, let's start with Brandon Coleman, because I know you and Craig talked about him a lot. I think it was yesterday.
Mhm.
And on the Take Command podcast, shout out Craig Hoffman. But again, but you guys did talk about him. So what can he be, the left tackle?
Yeah, I think he can. I think the short answer is yes. I think he can be it. I think just like with Jaden Daniels and all these prospects, it's a projection. So you just look at what's in front of you. Here's a guy in 2000. So to be perfectly candid, when we started the process, I evaluated him as a guard, and I feel semi-justified in that because he worked out as a guard at the Senior
Right.
Bowl. But one of the things that I would point to is just in 2022, he played almost exclusively tackle. I think he only
Mhm.
had 9 snaps at guard. So when you watch him, when you watch those snaps and you watch those games, he's a guy that I think shows good lateral quickness, understands how to set that kind of angle set, not a true vertical set, a little tight in the hips, but can set that angle set, has those 35-inch arms, can reach out and touch you, and has great punch and great timing on the punch, and then also has a great relationship to the rusher. So I think it's awesome. I don't know why they decided to move him into guard. Maybe the next guy up there was a good football player, but I think you see a lot of guard traits, and so or a lot of tackle traits, excuse me. So I think you see a football player who's very physical. He's a self-made guy, 0-star recruit coming out, figured out how to play football after like 1 year of high school football, which is great. But the timing of the punch, the power of the punch, the length, the foot speed, the general athleticism, especially when you look at his RAS numbers, are tackle numbers. And now it's just about, can you kind of clean up some of his deficiencies in pass pro. Tends to be a little bit kind of extends or bends at the waist a little bit
Mhm.
sometimes when he punches, can put himself in a bad spot. But I think the traits are there, and I get excited because unlike some of the other prospects, Patrick Paul, Kingsley Sumataya, Kieran Amadiji from Yale, those guys had some pretty glaring technical issues that would need to be corrected. This guy doesn't have those same technical issues. Now, there's some questions about, I think, is he better suited just from a comfort level, from an athleticism standpoint, to be a tackle or guard? But I think when you watch that 2022 film, you say, man, I'd give this guy a shot and see if he can get it done. And again, not the hulking Patrick Paul type build, but in terms of the athleticism, the body weight, and the length, I think you feel pretty good about him at least having an opportunity to win that job.
It's funny because as we know, like a lot of times when you talk about tackle versus guard, it comes down to arm length. But
Yeah,
his arm length is pretty good. I mean,
it's
like you said,
it's
like
excellent. It's
right.
excellent.
It's the I think it's like almost 35 inches, almost.
Yeah,
And 34 is like considered good. So, and there are other guys. I think it's like Jordan Morgan, Tyler
yeah,
Guyton. Both those guys had shorter arm length, and they may be more guards as well. So, but and you're right. Like in watching some of the 22 tape, you do see some good things in pass pro that I wonder about. And like sometimes it looks like the ability to anchor, but then sometimes like depending on how quick are you with your hands, et cetera.
yeah. I think that's the thing is like one of the things that I look for in offensive line. Like the I had a coach tell me one time, what you're looking for with tackles is if they don't have arm length, do they have the foot speed? And I think his arm length is good enough, like you were saying, and I think his foot speed's good enough because there's times where I've seen him kind of tight set the angle, punch, the guy works the edge, and he can flip his hips and kind of widen that pocket. So I think he's a guy that again, given the right coaching, given the right environment, which is true of all the prospects, I think he could be that guy. Like he reminds me of I think it's DJ Humphries, the guy from Arizona, when Cliff was there, he was like that 6'4.5", had long arms, was really looked more like a guard when you just looked at him kind of standing alone, but had a really great feel for pass protection and tackle. And really that's what you're looking for right at left tackle there is a guy with the athletic traits, the length and the feel. I think that's the other thing. He has a really good feel for his relationship to the rusher, which is something that I find to be very hard to coach when I do my kind of offensive line consulting. So the fact that he's got that, it makes me really encouraged that, hey, maybe we clean up a little bit of his footwork, kind of the timing or how he punches, so he's not overextending too much. I think there's an opportunity for him to be pretty good because I think he weighed in at 317 at the combine, but I think he played at like 325. So big, thick lower half, can sit on power. And again, that length is going to be extremely helpful, coupled with the tremendous athleticism. He ran one of the fastest 40s at the combine, and he had a very, I think he had a 34-inch vertical jump. So
Yep.
great athlete for a man of his size, and a guy that the more I watch him, the more I familiarize myself with him in 2022 specifically, I feel more confident about him filling that left tackle role, or at least competing there.
Why do you think he would that more saw him as a guard too? He is thicker in that lower. Like, is that part of the reason you think, or why did you think that some teams saw him more as a guard?
I think it's the thick lower half. He's kind of built like a guard. I
He
really
is.
think the main thing is he wears this stinking cowboy collar, like a board, like old high school
Oh,
board,
yeah.
and it does lend him. It makes him look like he's a little stiff in the upper back. And usually when you see that kind of bulky, stiff upper back, those guys tend to be guards more. Um, like I think Zach Martin's a great example of that. Like obviously a great tackle in college, but kind of had that stiff upper back. And so I was like, oh, like he'll project to guard. But I think, when you look at him as a mover, kind of blocking out his aesthetic, you kind of say, well, he does move like a tackle because he's got these kind of really nimble feet. He's got the arm length. So I really believe that's part of it. In conjunction with him kind of being a thicker lower half guy.
Can Cornelius like? And we don't. It's. I was going to ask you how long it could take him, but I don't think anybody knows till you get him out there to see how quickly he can learn and all that. But is Cornelius a good option until he gets there?
Yeah, and what's crazy is I actually feel better about Coleman starting than I would have some of those other guys. Maybe his ceiling athletically isn't quite as high. I mean, those guys were freaks, but I do think he kind of falls in that Roger Rosengarten bucket for me, and in terms of a guy who's very technical and very proficient. So I do think he can start relatively quickly. Obviously we got to see how he looks on the field, like you're saying, but I do think one of the most significant free agent signings this offseason was Cornelius Lucas because he does give you the flexibility to say, hey, like I've talked to some of my friends, O-line friends around the league. They're like, why don't they just let Cornelius start? Like he's a tremendous pass protector. He's got a great feel for using his length and position of the rusher. And is he the best left tackle in the NFL? No, but is he top 15? And the people I talked to said potentially he could be. So I do think that's a really nice signing because he's a guy that I think can play pretty consistently. We've seen him play very high levels for short periods of time. Maybe he can stretch that out, but I think he's a great signing because he gives you some flexibility in terms of bringing a young player along. And let's say hypothetically that Brandon Coleman is a better guard. You don't need to be, freaking out about left tackle this year because of Cornelius. And I also think you bring up a great point, or you brought up a great point. It's not just Cornelius or Brandon Coleman or Sam Cosmi or Wiley. It's how Cliff calls the offense.
Mhm.
And right now, I'm getting the sense from just talking with people around the building, they understand that they need to insulate this young quarterback through play calling and by playing excellent defense. And I think if you can do that, you're going to take a lot off the quarterback's plate. You're going to take a lot off the offensive line plate. And I believe that that is the way. That's maybe the most effective way to bring a young quarterback along and bring a young offensive line along.
And I like with Biotish and Allegretti, I think you have guys who are run blockers inside to go with Cosme that gives you an advantage there. And then Ben Stinnett too, like watching him, that dude can block and he can block out of a fullback position too, which is not easy for a guy who also plays tight end.
Yeah, I'm really excited about him, in terms of the flexibility he's going to be able to bring to the offense. You mentioned his ability to block as a fullback, his ability to block in line. That was really great to see at the Senior Bowl because he didn't have to do it. He did fine with it at Kansas State, but didn't have to do a ton of it. So seeing it live and in person was really helpful. And then seeing the athlete and like the competitor, I think was the other thing at the Senior Bowl that really jumped out to me. He didn't have to do all these kind of like 90-degree breaks and cuts, but he had to do a little bit more of that at the Senior Bowl. Made some really nice contested catches against some very good coverage players. So I think that flexibility to be like, hey, are we in 21 personnel? Are we in 22 personnel? Are we in 12 personnel? Or are we in a version of 11, like maybe Big 11, where he's kind of playing in the slot? I think is all on the table for you but it all starts with his physicality. You mentioned the fullback, you mentioned the inline stuff. It all starts with that. And then his athleticism as a pass catcher can find you those matchups. I heard Adam Peters make the comp to Kyle Juszczyk. I remember
Right.
my first note on him is this the next Kyle Juszczyk? That was
Really?
the first thing I thought when I saw him. Yeah, I
Why'd you
went back
think
and looked
that?
at my notes because they kind of move around the
They
same.
do.
Obviously, they have similar numbers. Like they're not, like there's a toughness there. There's an athlete in this like tough kind of boxer body, which I appreciate, and I think that's ultimately what you're looking at is like this is a guy that can create mismatches because now we can dictate personnel to defense much in the same way Kyle Juszczyk does in San Francisco.
How much? So again, I go back to the line and the protection because, the funny thing is I get sometimes people saying like, they didn't do anything to the line. Like, well, they did sign 2 starters inside. It's not like they haven't
Yeah.
addressed it. We just don't know yet who in the middle at week 8, who's going to be starting at left tackle. It could be Lucas, it could be Coleman. But how much can some of these other moves like help protect Daniels and like beyond just the play calling, just, how much can the run game and just all that stuff set him up in a better way to help in that area?
Well, I think even just from a pass protection standpoint, having a very strong interior is something that I often underrate. Like tackle is one of the things that makes a tackle effective. I think when you look at like Jake Matthews, for example, when I was in Atlanta, they had 2 pretty solid guards inside. But basically, what those guards allow you to do and the center allow you to do is allows the quarterback to step up, and so it allows the tackle to set in a very specific way. I can set more inside shade, a little bit more conservative, and really focus on running you by, as opposed to, when I talk to, Morgan Moses, who plays in Baltimore and loves Lamar Jackson, but his set changes with Lamar because he has to be more head up because Lamar can kind of go any direction. So kind of shoring up that interior of the offensive line deleverages the tackle just from the jump, just makes that job so much easier for him because now I can force a one-way go, right? I can force slide help that way because Sam Cosmi can win a one-on-one or whatever it may be. So I think that's something just improving the quality of the interior there is extremely important. And then, like we talked about, running the football. Like I think when you look at Kyle Shanahan, one of the things I think that I just love about his offensive philosophy is the hardest thing to do in the offense outside of playing quarterback is pass protect. So I want my offensive linemen to have to do that as little as possible. And you can tell he calls games with the clear objective of saying, I don't want to be in a drop back pass set more than 5 to 10 times in a game. And because that's the hardest thing outside of playing the quarterback position that anybody has to do on this football field. So I think just the play calling will limit that. The strengthening of the interior will help with that. And I think all of those things kind of lend themselves to a more effective offensive line. Again, most players in the NFL are not scheme independent. Like Trent Williams is scheme independent. He can be good in any scheme, but most players are scheme reliant. And so I think that's why I'm so excited now that we've got all these pieces here. Can Cliff and he's shown an ability to do this, insulate this offensive line and insulate Jaden Daniels in a way that allowed them to be the most effective versions of themselves.
Couple other guys and get you out of here. Newton, second round pick. Like, what did you think of him?
Yeah, Newton is a guy that I think plays extremely hard. He's got great hand usage. He's very, very twitchy and bursty off the ball. I don't think he has that true kind of. He's very, very good, but like that elite bend and kind of that Aaron Donald ability to kind of touch your shoulder to the grass. Doesn't have that, but I think he makes up for it by playing extremely hard and playing with great power, and he gets himself into a lot of plays. And I'm really excited to see just have some more rotational depth initially for Payne and Allen, because I think part of the reason that they struggled last year is they were just playing too much, and now you have this great resource. And then the other thing I think that depending on how he looks as a pass rusher, which I'm assuming will be pretty good based on his film, I'm talking about Newton now, is now maybe you can get three of those guys on the field at the same time. And I just remember, Allen and Payne, when they were lined up on tackles, like tackles are not ready for the power that they bring on the edge. So finding those mismatches with Johnny Newton and those other two players, I think is also a very exciting proposition. So, we don't know exactly how that's going to progress, but in terms of best case scenario, guy that's going to spell both those guys right away, add some pass rush juice, and can potentially be used as a chess piece in conjunction with those other defensive linemen to find some mismatches.
Right. And then along with that, Luvu and guys like Sam are still blitzing and adding to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Luvu is one of those guys. It's so fun to think about the personnel on this team now, like in terms of defense, because you could have a package where, Quan Martin's your middle linebacker and Sanders Still's the nickel. Yeah, and I just think it's a really cool kind of thought experiment to think about, Luvu rushing the edge, maybe Newton and Payne and Allen on the other side, kind of creating that overload. Then you get Sanders still playing the nickel with Chin at the linebacker and Quan at the other linebacker with three safeties behind it. And it's true kind of positionless football. And obviously that's not going to be all the time. And we've got to see how guys develop, but just that's what they've done here in terms of, Sanders still and Quan last year, and drafted some of these pieces, and just thinking about how they use those guys in Dallas, like it could be pretty special, which is very exciting. And just the problems that creates from an identification standpoint for the offense in these third down situations or even second and long situations. So I really can't wait to see how creative this coaching staff can be with these newly added playmakers. And obviously they have to develop and they have to come along, but I think ultimately that's probably the vision that they're chasing there.
Of the picks we haven't talked about, is there one that kind of like gets you going the most, that excites you the most?
I really enjoyed all three of the kind of late day picks. Jordan McGee kind of as this kind of linebacker, this athletic traits linebacker that can cover, that can hit, that, has shades of what I think the modern linebacker is going to be, with Fred Warner being the archetype there, guy that has that coverage ability, has the physicality, probably adds a little bit of weight, but kind of fits it again in that positionless football, runs a 4.5. Kind of has this kind of star body type. He's 6'3", he's 225, maybe adds a little bit of weight. Same thing with Dominic Hampton, 6'2", he's got those 33.5-inch arms, big body, runs a 4.5, 39-inch vertical, all those things. Again, a guy with tremendous athletic traits that fits this defensive vision and what they want to be. And then Jean-Baptiste is a guy that I love as a pass rush upside play, never really figured it out at Ohio State, showed flashes at Notre Dame, but has the measurables, has the size, has the burst, kind of built in a lab from a pass rush standpoint. And when you draft that guy in the 7th round, I'm not saying he's going to be an impact player right away, but has the runway, given if the staff's able to give him some right tools or the correct tools to kind of be an impact immediately. So,
Logan, awesome. You're the best. Appreciate your insight always.
John, man, thank you so much for having me on. I love talking draft with you.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Logan for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Sunday night, Monday morning with another podcast. I have a few guests coming up over the next week to share some insight into the draft picks. And then we also have the rookie mini camp a week from today. Talk to you next time.